Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started. I want to welcome you all to the romance panel at the Green Mountain Book Festival. I'm especially excited about this panel. I'm a long-term romance reader. I've always loved romance. I've always felt like it was something that I had to hide, I had to be ashamed of, especially when I was younger growing up. And I think we've seen this real resurgence lately of just this really embracing the genre, especially with younger readers. So I'm really excited that a literary festival like this can kind of celebrate a genre that I don't think we give enough attention to. So I'm really excited, and I really thank you all for being here to do that. So my name is Rachel Carter, and I will be moderating this event. I am a young adult novelist. I tried my hand at romance. It is a lot harder than it seems to write. I found out very quickly. I was like, oh, I read romance, I'll be great at this. I was not great at it. And it was something that I had to really work at. So I'm really excited to be talking to these amazing writers today about all things romance. Before we get started, I just want to thank a few of our sponsors who have helped make this festival happen. Without their support, there's no way we would be sitting here today. So thank you to one of our main sponsors, Phoenix Books. They have a mobile bookstore downstairs, and after this panel, you can go down and buy books by any of these authors, and they will also do a signing a little bit later today. I also want to thank the Fletcher Free Library for hosting us, and they've done so much more. They're just so supportive. Our other sponsors are Burlington City Arts, Hanson and Doremus, Media Factory, Northfield Savings Bank, Pomerleau Real Estate, UVM Humanities Center, Vermont's Art Council, and Vermont Humanities. So thank you so much to all of them. So before we get started, if your cell phone's on, just please mute it or turn it off so that we can all concentrate on this. And I'm going to go down the line and introduce our panelists today. We have an amazing group. So much talent in one room. And after we do that, we're going to play a little game of Two Truths and a Lie, Romance Edition, with our authors, which I think is going to be really fun. I have some questions for them, and then we want to open it up to you guys too, so if you have any questions for them also. So up first, on the end, we have Anne Stuart. Anne Stuart has been writing since the dawn of time. She sold her first book to Ballantine 50 years ago, and since then she's made the New York Times bestseller list, USA Today, Publishers Weekly, and maybe even the Wall Street Journal lists. She's appeared on Entertainment Tonight, won the Romance Writers of America Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as numerous Rita Awards, as well as regional awards and Romantic Times Awards. She's published with every major publisher and is now happily publishing on her own. Her next book is To Catch a Thief, if she ever manages to finish the damned thing. In the middle here, we have Catherine Drake. Catherine has worked for many years in the land conservation field, developing public outdoor recreation areas and preserving forests and farmland for future generations. Her first book, The Treehouse on Dog River Road, is set in Waterbury, Vermont, and was the One Town, One Book Community Reading Program selection for 2022. It was also a finalist in the 2022 Next Generation Indie Book Awards in the romance category, and it has been a bestseller in several bookstores across Vermont. LaQuette writes sexy, stylish, and sensational romance. That means she writes sentimental and steamy stories like Hallmark movies, but with lots of sex, featuring at least one main character who always keeps it cute. She is a multi-published author and the former president of the Romance Writers of America, a 2021 Vivian Award finalist, and a DEAIA activist who aims to bring diversity and inclusivity to the romance novel industry. She is also the 2016 Author of the Year Golden Apple Award winner, as well as the 2016 Right Touch Readers Award winner. This Brooklyn native writes unapologetically bold, character-driven stories. Her novels feature diverse ensemble casts who are confident in their right to appear on the page. So these are our authors. So like I said, we are going to start off with a little game. We're going to play this Two Truths and a Lie Romance Edition. So I've asked them to prepare this ahead of time. They're going to give you 3 lines, 3 little stories, 3 things about romance, about themselves, and we have to guess which one is the lie. Okay, so why don't we start with Anne?
All right. Can you hear, everybody can hear me? Well, they can hear me in this little room anyway. First one, I'm going to talk, my stories are all about writing. My first one was when I sold my first piece of writing in 1953, 70 years ago. I was paid for it, and it was published in a national magazine. Second story, when I was 15 years old, I fell in love with John Lithgow. who, if you don't know, he's in Third Rock from the Sun and stuff like that. And I wrote a book about him where he was a Scottish laird, because Lithgow is a Scottish name, so he was the Laird of Linlithgow. It was just, And the third thing is, after all the books I've written, and at my stately age, I have gotten really tired of love scenes. They're just, I mean, it's not, I'm all in favor of love scenes, but just there's so many, and you can only describe something so many ways before it gets really tedious. And I'm tired of writing them, and I'm tired of reading them.
Okay, all right. What do we think is the lie? So up first, and you can raise your hand to vote, we have you published your first short story, you said? Yes.
Sort of an article.
An article, okay. We have the article, Fell in Love with John Lithgow, or Are Overrating Stevie? Well, let's start with the first one. Publish your first article. Do you think this is a lie? No. Fell in Love with John Lithgow. Okay. And are sick of writing Stevie scenes. I think that's a lie too.
Yeah. That was easy. After my potty mouth of beforehand, yes, I love writing sexy scenes. I love reading them. It's what it's all about. These characters are falling in love, and if you just suddenly close the bedroom door, you miss half the fun.
Awesome. Okay, Catherine, you're up.
Okay, number one. When I was 19 years old, I brought my then boyfriend of about a year to my older sister's wedding, and it was at my parents' house, and it was a good time. And then 6 weeks later, I bring home another guy, and I tell my parents that I'm quitting college and I'm moving with him to Philadelphia to put him through graduate school. And so this is like 6 weeks later, and my mother, it was a long time ago, and my mother asked him, well, are you going to get married? And he said, well, I love her, but I don't really know her that well. So that's number one. Number two, after my divorce, a bunch of friends and I decided that we were going to spend our 50th birthdays at Burning Man. Does everybody know what Burning Man is? Okay, so we decided to go to Burning Man, and about 10 of us, and at Burning Man they have all these different camps. And when I was at Burning Man, there was only one other girl in our group that was single, and so she and I decided to go to this camp, and this camp, big tent with a big sign that said Costco, just like the logo Costco, but it said Costco Soulmate Trading Center. And that's where you would go and meet people. And that's where I met my second husband and he was from Vermont, and that's how I ended up here in Vermont. Number three, one of these guys, when we were on a road trip, pulled into a mall and jumped out of the car and said, I'll be right back. I want to go pick up a book because we were going on a little trip. And he said, just stay with the dog. And he went into the mall, and I was kind of annoyed, to be honest, because I'm like, well, I wanted to get going with the trip. And he comes out, and he doesn't have a book. And I'm like, where's the book? What'd you do? And he pulls out an engagement ring and asked me to marry him in the parking lot of a shopping mall.
Ooh, okay, these are good ones. All right, so we have to guess which one the lie is. So the first one is new guy after 6 weeks, who Catherine moved with. Who thinks that's a lie? Okay. Second one is Burning Man.
Yeah.
All right. And then the third one is the shopping parking lot proposal. Okay, which is the lie, Catherine?
I'm glad there's a little diversity. I didn't go to the Soulmate Trading Center at Burning Man, but I did go to Burning Man, and it was there.
Okay, cool. All right, LaQuette, let's hear yours.
First one is, as a writer, it's a very private and solitary existence to write. And when you put your stuff out in the world, you're always, concerned about how people are going to receive it, especially people that know you. So my mother read a couple of my books, and I was very worried about what she was going to think about them. And because my books are very high heat, and she is my mother, and I was very much expecting that I was going to get a tongue lashing for the filth that I produced. And surprisingly, she was like, nah, go ahead, girl, this is great. I love this. Give me more. The second is when I was, how I came to be published with Harlequin. Initially, it didn't go so well. So my agent called me, I was at a RWA conference in New York, and my agent called me for a meeting in the hotel, and I go to sit and talk with her about, you know, what's going on at the conference, what leads she has. She says, hey, Harlequin's interested and wants to talk to you. And my response was, about what? And she said, about, you know, you submitting and then possibly signing you. And I said, again, about what? And it wasn't that I was being facetious or I thought I was too good to publish for Harlequin. I was very flattered. But Harlequin wasn't exactly known for publishing what I published, which was stories that focused on Black folks just living and loving out loud and, you know, experiencing joy. And I write most of my stories take place in Brooklyn because I am a Brooklynite. And, you know, when you read Harlequin categories, they haven't happened oftentimes in these really exotic places, especially places overseas. And I just wasn't sure that I was going to be a good fit. So when my agent tried to push me to go talk to Harlequin, I turned them down and said, no, thank you. And last, my husband, I am a very, very loud person, if you might not have guessed. And my husband is very quiet and reserved. And so when we were planning our wedding, I was all ready to have this huge, big wedding that I always dreamed of, but it terrified him. Like, the absolute thought of it terrified him. And so because I loved him so much and because I really knew he was the one, we had a small intimate ceremony inside of my parents' home. And it was beautiful and lovely, and I don't regret it whatsoever. We've been together now, next couple of weeks will be 15 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's guess the lie. The first one is Mom approves of the steamy scenes. The second one is turn down Harlequin. Mm-hmm. And the third one is, oh, sorry, we're going slow. I gotta go slower. Okay, so the first one we're gonna guess. Do you think it is a lie that her mother approved of her steamy scenes? Okay, a few. Do you think it is a lie that she turned down Harlequin? Maybe. And then, actually, I think the last one. Do you think that she had a private, quiet, intimate wedding ceremony? Do you think that's a lie? Okay, which one is it?
The third one is the lie. We had a huge wedding with like 22, like a big Southern wedding with like 22 attendants alone. It was ridiculous, but I loved every minute of it. And because he's a good guy, he's like, just go forth and do what makes you happy. I did actually turn Harlequin down.
Really? Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay, so I am going to ask them all some questions, and we're just going to have a big conversation and then open it up to you guys if you have any questions for them too. And so just to get started, I wanted to ask each of you, romance is such a broad term. It's really more of an umbrella category that just encompasses so many subgenres. And so to say you're a romance reader, I think oftentimes the next part of that conversation is, here are the genres I like, here's the subgenres, here's the tropes, here's the niches that I'm into. So I was wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about what you write and how you would sort of classify yourself as a romance novelist. Do you write more historical? Do you write a huge spectrum? Have you written everything? And I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about what is the type of romance that you write. We can start at Anne and work our way down.
All right, well, one of the problems in my career is I've never settled on one path. I write historicals, I write contemporaries, suspense, mainly. They all have a common theme of romantic suspense. I have killers and bad guys in my contemporaries and my historicals. What I do write, I used to hate the word trope because it seemed to sort of belittle the story, but what I do tend to write, which I discovered looking back. Well, one thing I discovered looking back at my first 10 books was that I always had parents who betrayed their children. And then I looked back at my first 20 books, and they always had parents who betray their children. So I always write parents who betray their children. But the other thing I write is the Persephone myth, or better known as Beauty and the Beast. I love the story of the normal, ordinary girl, not necessarily innocent, and not too stupid to live, but it's just sort of a regular girl and a dark, dangerous hero. I just always find that just deeply compelling.
Great. Catherine?
So I think I am firmly in the contemporary romance lane. I really like popular culture, and I like young people, and so my first book has a 28-year-old protagonist. And I think one of the things that happened to me early, I've only written the one book, but I have others in the pipeline. But one of the things that happened to me early when I was starting to promote the book was that I was in an interview with a bookseller, owner of a bookstore, and we were doing this interview, and she referred to my book as a smart romance. And I was really grateful for her to say that, because that really did better encompass what I thought I was trying to do, that it was a romance. Clearly, you know, it has a happily ever after, and it is a female protagonist and a love interest. But there was a lot of other themes that I like to put in my books. That there was, in this particular book, there's a lot about working moms and climate change, and you know, where to live your best life and what makes community. And so I like that term smart romance, because it's a little more to it than what maybe just thinking about the two love interests getting through their things. There's other aspects. So contemporary.
LaQuette?
I write a little bit of everything. So as you can see right here, there's a romantic comedy, here's a romantic suspense. I'm working on trying to come up with submission materials for what my editor calls romantasy. You know, that's like Sleepy Hollow fanfic meets The Mummy. And it's, for me, I didn't really care about the subgenre. I just wanted to write stories where people I recognized were present. Because when I started reading romance at 16, the first book I encountered was The Devil's Price by Carol Mortimer, which is an amazing book, and I devoured it in one sitting. But for the next 2 years, going to the library, picking up books, the only thing I found was more books like that. There were never any protagonists with curvy black chicks from Brooklyn. And so I wanted to put that on the page. And so that's always my focus when I sit down, except for when I'm writing male-male romance. But when I'm writing heterosexual romance, I'm always looking to put a black woman in a position of joy, to experience joy. I'm not writing about her struggle. I'm not writing about that her identity as a black woman is her conflict. She is generally, when she enters the page, she's a whole person, and she just happens to be open to love or in a position where love can come into her life. And so that's always going to be my focus when I write. So when I write, I am very particular about making sure that I am creating positive, controlling images where black women are concerned.
So some of you have answered this a little bit, but I wonder if you can dig a little more into why romance. I think that there's a lot of novels that have romantic themes, right? But that's not necessarily the same thing as writing a romance novel. So what brought you to this genre in particular? Do you want to start with Catherine?
Sure. Well, one of the things about romance is that I really feel like it comes from the female perspective, and I really like that it's female-generated stories often, and I like the equalization. There's a power dynamic that happens in a love story where, if you're going to get to the happily ever after, you're going to have some kind of equalization that occurs over the course of the novel. And in my case, I didn't really start out to write a romance novel. I didn't say, this is my genre. I just started writing a book, and it very, very quickly, the central character was having a sort of a a life crisis, and it evolved into a romance, because as you're trying to figure out your life, oftentimes, you know, in this case, she was, you know, very set on trying to figure out what's best for her, and love is so universal, and she happens to, you know, and find somebody at the time when she was trying to figure out her own life. And I just liked how that kind of evolved. That's what happens in life. You know, you just sometimes wrong person, wrong time. So I sort of like fell into romance, but now I'm very excited about incorporating love into every story that I end up.
LaQuette?
I never had a chance to write anything else. I grew up, when I grew up, there was no like daycares and stuff like that. Not that there weren't, but within my family's means, there was no daycare. And so grandma was the babysitter. And between the hours of 12:30 p.m. and 4 p.m., grandma was watching her stories. And if you were in the house, you were watching stories with grandma. And so I grew up like watching, loving all my children, One Life to Live, General Hospital, and then as an adult, I sort of creeped over into the CBS soaps on Young and the Restless and Bold and the Beautiful. And that became sort of my foundation for storytelling, this, just seeing these couples go through these ups and downs and the will they, won't they, and it sort of imprinted on my young brain. And so when I started like reading for pleasure, and you know, I can remember like going through all of the Sweet Valley High books and adoring them, even though again, nothing about their lifestyles, I couldn't really identify with anything that they were going through, but the story of, you know, these young people falling in love and learning about relationships and how to handle them, it really intrigued me. So by the time I discovered romance, you know, and when I came to romance, I actually had like, you know, the really typical uneducated perspective of it, which was a friend of mine I would see bringing these Harlequin Presents to class every day. And I was about 16 years old when this happened, and I asked her, like, why do you always bring those trashy novels to school? And she shut me down with 5 words and said, have you ever read one? And I couldn't say that I had, so she's like, well, maybe you should read it before you start trashing it. And she gave me the book she was reading, which was The Devil's Price by Carol Mortimer. And by the next day, I'd finished that book and was asking her for more. She became my pusher of sorts. And she would just bring me new books every day, and I'd devour them until she finally just said, listen, I don't have any more to give you. You're gonna have to go get your own. And I was a broke kid in Brooklyn, so I'm like, well, where am I gonna get these books from? And I'm ashamed to admit that until that time I did not have a library card. But then I went and got one, and I was at the library like every other day picking up stacks of books in the library. And you know, she asked me, are you really reading all these books? Because you're here like every 2 days. I'm like, yeah, I'm reading all these books, like cover to cover. So there was really, like when I discovered that I wanted to write, the stories that formed in my head were always romance without me thinking of it. So I think it's just, you know, thanks to, God bless my late grandmother, because she sort of like put that fire there for me.
Anne?
Well, I'll start with a tragic story. I was 5 years old, and I fell madly in love with Peter Pan, and I wanted him to be my boyfriend. And it turns out he was Mary Martin, and it was very distressing to me. I also remember when I was 8 years old, my aunt took me to see Around the World in 80 Days, which is a really long movie. And according to her, I sat there beside her and kept saying, when do we get to the love part? Which I always thought would be a great title for an autobiography. It's sort of sad. But I just always liked making up stories. From early on, I would go to bed at night and tell myself stories, always romances, always love stories. I don't know if I was looking for love or what. But I always was interested I was never interested in regular boys. I was interested in fantasy. And it was interesting because my therapist said I used this coping mechanism of making up these stories as my way to make a living, which is sort of convenient. I read all the time, and I read love stories. I read Gothics. Some of the children's books weren't love stories, but they were close to it. There was usually a cute boy who was around to play with the cute girl in the children's books. But for instance, met with Agatha Christie. I read all of Agatha Christie, but the ones I loved best were Tommy and Tuppence, not Old Miss Marple or Ukupo, which I do love them both now, but I just like love stories. They're just the way I am.
I love that. I think all of you touched on something that I think as romance readers is very universal, which is that we read a lot, right? I think romance readers tend to be some of the most prolific readers out there. And romance really is the backbone of the publishing industry. And without romance, there would be none of these other fancy genres. Having said that, I think oftentimes romance is the most undervalued. And as we were saying before, sometimes you feel like you have to hide your love of this, or it's something that you're supposed to be ashamed of. And I think that's something that we've all, as romance authors and readers, have faced. How have you dealt with that? Have you faced criticism as a romance author? How have you sort of dealt with that in your career, and what has that looked like for you? LaQuette?
Oh, I've definitely had to deal with that. And my response is always this: when someone attempts to, say, oh, it's not a legitimate genre, my response is always, oh, I'm cashing these legitimate checks. So until that changes, it will be a legitimate genre to me. But again, I also quote statistics. Romance makes $1.8 billion with a B dollars a year. That's more than any other genre of publishing. So the reason you get your Stephen Kings and the like is because romance is keeping the lights on. So, the next time someone tells you, oh, that's not real literature, you tell them they won't get their favorite fancy, important novelist's new great work if romance doesn't sell. And that's just the truth of it.
Yeah. Anne?
Well, I came from an academic family. So as you can imagine, they didn't have a whole lot of respect for what I was writing, but they respected me, and they were supportive, which was good. I have a friend who's I can't identify her, but her father was a very, very famous writer, and her mother was a college professor, and she's a college professor, and this woman does tremendously well with New York Times hardcovers. And when her mother was on her deathbed, she said, I hope someday you'll write a real book. It's just, good riddance. I think that sexism has a huge amount to do with it. These are books written by women, primarily, for women. And it's just easier to call them silly little books. Years ago, centuries ago, people used to have the same attitude about novels in general, that they were just silly little things and you shouldn't be wasting your time with it. So I try not to get mad when everybody asks me if I'm still cranking them out. And the nicest people say that. I say usually something about, yes, I'm still writing, because I will always write. I'm a born writer. But it's just something you learn to live with. If you fight every battle, it gets too distressing. Now, LaQuette, or is it LaQuette?
LaQuette.
It is LaQuette. Okay, she had to fight the battle a lot as president of RWA. Fortunately, I never had to do that.
I do not recommend.
No. I was on the board once, so that was enough. But it's just not worth the battle. It's their loss. And we make a whole lot of money, which is doesn't necessarily mean that we're better. It shows that people really want to read our books. They're not the books people are supposed to read. Not the books that are for usually book clubs, but they're what give people joy. Mm-hmm. And that's a real gift to be able to give people that joy.
Yeah, I faced this quite a bit when I first told people that my book was under the romance category, and I'm like, they're hopeful, they're upbeat. It's 20, I was writing it, came out right after the pandemic. People need happiness and joy in their lives, and I would talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that really underscored this for me was that the New York Times didn't even talk about undervalued. They didn't even have a romance book reviewer until I think 2018. Does that sound right? I think they've had a couple since then. Now they are seeing the benefit of that, and they're popular reviews, they're popular genre, and I try and be very proud about it, and let people know that you got to try it before you diss it. So I think we all sort of
Yeah, the
that
New York
experience.
Times is still kind of problematic because they
Yeah.
they have a reviewer, and that's great, but they completely manipulated their entire what do you call it, their entire method of how you get on the list, of how they decide a book gets on the list, and it was mostly to disallow ebooks that were on the list, and for the most part, romance is very heavy in ebooks. Not just with respect to traditional publishing, but ebooks are the bread and butter of indie publishing. And so all of these people were getting on the lists because they were making ridiculous money and selling ridiculous amounts of copies of ebooks. And most of them were romance, and the New York Times didn't like that, so they switched some things around, and now you don't see as many. The only person you see consistently on the New York Times list is Colleen Hoover. And she, as lovely as her work is, and I'm not trying to discredit her work in any way, she is not representative of the entire romance genre or the entire romance genre readership.
You bring up an interesting point with ebooks, because I feel like that was a bit of a game changer in the romance reading, in part from the point of view of a reader, because we want to read so many books, and it's cheap, it's easy to have them. You don't have stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of paper books.
And with romance especially, because of a lot of the negativity, the outward negativity associated with romance, many people didn't want. I remember when I was in college, I would see everyone on the train. I'd get on the train every morning and go to school in Manhattan, and I'd see everyone reading a Harry Potter book. And I could not understand why all these grown folks were reading what looked like a children's book. My sister, again, later disabused me of my ignorance and made me read them, and I thought they were fabulous. But, you could do that with Harry Potter and not be shamed. Right? But romance readers would be shamed for what they were reading and for the covers that were on them, which is where you get the term bodice rippers from. And so ebooks became this huge thing because romance readers could read what they wanted and not have to deal with all of the negativity and the shame that was heaped upon them because they were reading what they enjoyed. So ebooks definitely were a significant thing in romance.
Since we're talking about the industry a little bit, I wanted to know your perspective on if you think things are shifting, how you're seeing things shifting, maybe even in the last 5 to 10 years or so. I was talking to Todd Gross, who's a bookseller at Phoenix Books. He was saying that his romance section, 6 years ago was this big, and now it's huge. And we were talking, LaQuette and I, about there's a new romance bookstore that opened in Brooklyn. I went there recently and kind of had a moment. And I think that seems like the younger generation seems to have less shame around reading these books and feeling proud about that. Have you noticed that shift, any of you, as authors?
100%. I've seen that bookstore thing happen in several bookstores here in Vermont, that they've expanded. They had nothing, and now it's much bigger.
Yeah. What about you, Anne? Because you've been writing in this industry, for a while. So have you noticed anything different?
Well, everything went through a major sea change when ebooks came along. Sadly enough, I went from 6 figures to 5 figures, which is tragic, but just under 6, so I'm still surviving. I've seen the change. There's more freedom, more more chance, there's more of a chance for people to write, to learn to write, and they learn to write while they're writing books and putting them out. It's a more democratic way of life, way of publishing, which is really nice, unless you get a stinker, not so nice. I am surprised that there have been larger sections of books because in bookstores, because the book publishers, the traditional publishers, have cut their lists way, way back. They're very, very hard to get a traditional sale nowadays. Harlequin's sections used to have big, like 2 sections in grocery stores, and now you can see 4 or 5 a month. So I'm very surprised to hear that bookstores are having larger romance sections, because I wonder where they get them from.
Interesting, yeah.
I think that is a matter of your experience. So romance is definitely changing in the sense that it's becoming more mainstream, and you see it in places like academia. I'm actually teaching a how to write romance class at a traditional institution in a traditional classroom. So yay, that's great for progress. But I think when you think about what becomes the face of romance, what becomes the representation of romance, there's still a long way to go, right? It is not as easy to walk into a store and find a book with Black protagonists on them. It is not as easy to find a book with LGBTQ plus characters. It is not an easy to find a book that has characters with disabilities. It's not, right? Those books are usually either relegated to a corner that most readership traffic don't go looking for, or they're just not supported at all. So even if they get the deals, they're not always given the same sorts of support that other books are given. And so it can be disheartening a little bit to see the progress, but to see that people who look like you, live like you, love like you are not really included in that process, within that progress, without someone taking a stand and saying, hey, you're forgetting all of these other people that live over here. Can we look at these folks for a little bit too? So there's progress, but there's still a whole lot of work to be done in order to make sure that romance is the inclusive place that it should be, because everyone, regardless of who you are, where you come from, you know, whatever other social constructs we use to categorize people, whatever your label is, you still deserve love because you're a human being, and human beings deserve love. And we should be able to all pick up a book and see our stories. We should all be able to pick up a book and read other people's stories, right? Like, I don't only read books that feature Black protagonists. If I did, I never would have attached to romance in the first place, because that really wasn't a thing in the 90s when I started reading romance. You could not find that. There were books that were out there, but those books were not put in the romance section. They were put in the African American section. And as a 16-year-old going into the library, I had not been trained to go into the African American section to look for all books that had anything to do with Blackness or that were written by Black people. Went in the African American section. And the same was true for the LGBTQ plus. It was not put in mainstream, you know, it was always put on the gay shelf. Right? So, and you know, Lord only knows where the gay shelf was in the bookstores, this little tiny corner. So it, you know, even though those things were out there, the visibility, even for someone who is of the community, is not present, right? And so my first 2 years of reading romance, I was reading nothing but lovely white people falling in love. And it wasn't an issue, but later on, as I begin to get older and start recognizing, hey, there's no one in these books that looks like me, then it starts sort of giving that subliminal message that you don't deserve love. And so it's really important that we get these sorts of stories out there, because we need for people, not just from people from those communities, to recognize that they deserve love, but we need people from outside those communities to recognize that people deserve love.
I like that.
Yeah, that's well said. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start talking about how you write romance and what that experience is like for you guys. So I've heard it said that, one major rule in writing a romance is you always have a happy ending. Do you agree with this? Or are there any other rules that you personally try to follow while you're writing romance? What kind of classifies this for you? Do you want to start with Anne?
Oh, well, yes, I want a happy ending. Or a bittersweet ending. It's got to have hope, at least for they also refer to happily for now, not happily ever after. But I want hope at the end. That's why I read romance. I want the people to be together. And I say people deliberately because there are romances with a whole string of romances called reverse harem or white shoes, where there are two or more heroes to one heroine. But I always have a hopeful ending, even if you know the character's probably not going to make it of 10 years, because I have lots of killers in my books, and usually the hero's a killer too. But
How does that work?
it does. Well, never mind. But one thing I do is the rules I follow loosely, but I find actually I do them automatically, is the hero's journey by Joseph Conrad. And there's a wonderful book by Christopher Vogler called The Writer's Journey, maybe, or The Artist's Journey. Anyway, it's following the Joseph Conrad thing, for lack of a better word. And I find that really is really accurate for when I look back at my books. They follow that line of happenings just automatically. It's just very, very basic to storytelling. And when I get stuck on a book, I'll go back and I'll look at Joseph Conrad or Christopher Vogler and look for an answer. Sometimes I find one, sometimes I don't. And the other thing I do when I get stuck on a book, except for the last one, which I threw away, I start writing longhand to just break up because I usually write all my books on the computer, but when things are getting stodgy and I need to sort of feel like I'm more in touch with it, writing longhand really helps.
Catherine?
Yeah, so rules. I love the happily ever after rule of romance because it really does take the pressure off of how your book is first picked up. Like when you pick up a romance book, there's not anybody questioning whether that is going to be the case. So it makes it a little bit more fun to puzzle out how to keep the reader in suspense of how they're going to get together. But it does happen. So I like that part of it. As far as rules that I personally like to write, I like to read it all, but I like to write very realistic and relatable characters. And again, in my wheelhouse, I'm going to write from a Vermont perspective, and I'm going to be writing more Vermont-placed books. But I don't like to have, in my story, one of my big rules is no lies, no big lies, no secrets that the love interest is keeping from the other love interest. Because I just want people to be able to relate and think of not have anything like that's hidden. And so that's just one of my rules.
I'm really big on GMC, goal, motivation, and conflict.
Yes.
I do a lot of my pre-writing work is focused on what these people think they want, why they want that particular thing they think they want, and what's stopping them from getting it, and what's stopping them from being in a relationship. And I do that because my books are filled with really big emotions. Like my characters are usually in their own heads a lot. Some people like that, some people don't, but those are just the characters that I create. They think a lot about what they're doing, and even when they're thinking about it, for me it's fun to see that thinking sort of change, where the emotion starts to take over regardless of logic, where they know that this is like I said I wasn't gonna do this. I said I wasn't gonna be emotionally connected to this person. But here I am, and I don't understand why that is, but I'm just gonna ignore it because I'm having fun, right, for the moment. I love the emotional back and forth, and I don't think you can really get that unless you understand why people are built the way they are. And it's a lot of, delving into their psychology and stuff like that. And as for things that I absolutely will not put in my books, it's just not my thing. And I'm not, yucking on anyone else's yum. If you love dark romance, that's your jam. I love it for you. I don't write really alpha heroes. And it's not just dark romance that is, let me clarify. I mean, there's really alpha heroes in all types of categories in romance. But I love a good beta. I love a good beta. I have much more fun with betas. If my male protagonists, if they don't, everything in them instinctually doesn't say, I want this woman from the moment they see her, I don't really want to deal with it. And so I usually write these betas who are very strong and self-confident in their own selves, but they're not trying to dominate her life. And so yeah, you're gonna get heroes from me that are instantly in love. They might not recognize it as love. To them, it usually comes off as lust, right? They are instantly, I gotta have her. And yeah, that's just my jam. I can't take an overbearing alpha hero. So yeah, not gonna happen in my books.
Actually,
No rapey guys.
my heroes are not considered alpha, they're considered gamma, which I never quite understood. I think it means worse than alpha. And since they're usually killers and quite often are a physical threat to the heroine, I guess it does mean worse than alpha.
I think you're a dark romance writer.
Well, dark heroes, definitely,
Yeah.
except I write romps too. Because if I do too many of the modern books with the dark heroes, then I get depressed. So I like to switch it out and write a more sunny historical romance.
I love
I
it.
would really like to see, I think you should teach a class on how to write rom-coms and happy books that have killers. I really want to, I take that class.
I've done it.
I take that class.
So we've talked a little bit about your steamy scenes and what the process of writing that is like. I know every romance writer kind of has maybe it changes by book, but sort of like a heat level that maybe you're willing to go up to. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about what that process is like for you, and if you have any tips, if anybody in the audience is an aspiring romance writer, how would you approach a scene like this? Start with you, Catherine.
So I'll probably be the most prudish of the writers here. I can tell you that right now. And so I was thinking about this, and as I was writing, obviously, and I realized that when I was coming up through my life, I never really wanted to hear about other people's sex lives. I never wanted to tell people about my sex life, and the reason why was because it was always kind of the situation where I couldn't exactly explain the emotional and the physical, and I know I can't write that. So, and to me, it all boiled down to you kind of had to be there, and I just couldn't pull that out of me. So it was real easy for me to pull off the closed door romance, and that's the way I'm most comfortable writing. So. It's not, they're it's not like it's a Christian romance or anything, they're contemporary people, they're gonna hook up, but you get to that point and then it's the next morning. and that makes me feel, and that's what I like to read, so, but I have read outside, but, so I don't have to deal with it so much,
Okay, all right. I feel like, yes, LaQuette is going to have a very different answer.
I write filth and I love it. I have no qualms about that. For me, though, the thing about romance, if you have a lot of, if your characters are having on-page sex frequently, the thing is, it can get monotonous. So what I do is, again, it goes back to that goal, motivation, and conflict sort of situation. Like, the sex in my book is a physical manifestation of the emotional state of the characters at that point, right? So they can hook up initially and it's just for fun, right? It's just lust, right? And lust is an emotion. With, you know, the next scene, it might not be just lust. Maybe it's because they're actually like emotionally connecting to this person, and this seems like for them the most natural thing. Next, it could be because of anger. It could be because of pain, or or grief. Any of those emotions can precede, you know, the sex scene and bring those two together. So it really, for me, it's more about, again, I write big emotions, and so sex is really just a sort of a physical marker to sort of give you a tangible idea of what that emotion looks like. So I write lots of it.
I feel like I'm.
Don't worry, I'm not contagious. I love sex. What can I say? I love writing sex. LaQuette is absolutely right. You can't just have sex and sex and sex and sex. There was an old belief, which I haven't heard much of in the last few years, that you needed 3 reasons for every scene. One was to move character. Sometimes titillation was a perfectly okay thing, but you had to have the 3 reasons to move those characters ahead. And so just having sex in a book is worthless. I've written books with only 1 sex scene. I haven't, and actually my early books didn't even have sex scenes in them. But it has to have a reason each time. Again, as I mentioned before, writing longhand, even when I write a book all on the computer, I quite often write the love scenes longhand, because there's something about the tactile sense of your hand and the pen and the paper that it just sort of gets you more into the physical world. And I have a whole playlist that I listen to with a lot of Al Green on it.
Yeah, all of us are doing
Yeah, I think so. But for me, it's very important. I did start reading a couple of books that were quote unquote clean, which really annoys me, because that's saying sex is dirty and sex is not dirty.
Yeah.
But I finally, the heroines were celibate, not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily a religious choice, but I find I just couldn't read it. There was just a whole aspect missing from their relationship. And we're writing about men and women, or men and men and women. We're talking about people falling in love, and not just loving each other, not like a family. We're writing about, I can't even say one-on-one, but I base most of the time it's one-on-one. And the physical part of it is really important to me, and to show who the characters are, and it makes a huge difference in their relationship every time they have sex. Somebody once said my usual sex scenes start with bitch, bastard, and go from there, which is not always true, but it can happen. I'm a great believer in angry sex, just to move a book along.
I just want to add that I think there is something to be said for like a slow burn too.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that you can achieve without getting too graphic. So,
But you can have a slow burn that
and
gets
then you
very
still
graphic.
get that too. Either way.
Yeah, I love slow burns. Slow burns are really nice because the payoff is so much bigger.
Yeah.
So I want to open this up to questions from you guys in a second, but first I just wanted to ask each of you to talk a little bit about an upcoming project or something that you're currently working on, or if there's something you want to let us know that we should be looking out for. So maybe we can start with LaQuette.
Oh, I am getting ready to start work on my first Harlequin Presents, which is really special for me because I feel like I've come full circle from where I started reading romance and turning to Harlequin down 20-something years later, and then finally saying, yes, I'll do this. And the reason I said yes is because I get to write about a Black kingdom where I get to have Black royalty on the page. And it is the most, I can't even tell you what this does for my soul to be able to write this and how giddy I am. You know, I wrote the first 3 chapters just for submission purposes. And I loved every minute of like putting words down in this story and, you know, creating my playlist for it and thinking of like the histories of how these people are connected, how this kingdom was created, which just for a little sneak peek. If you know anything about Black history in New York, in the like 1740 somethings, there was what they called the slave revolt. And what it was is there were some army bases that were being mysteriously destroyed. And so the obvious culprit, according to, you know, colonial folks, was the slaves. And so many slaves were either put to death or put on a boat to go to the Caribbean, where the slave experience was much harsher. And so in deciding that I needed to sort of bring that into the history, my kingdom is descendants of a group of people who were enslaved people who were put on a boat intended to go to the Caribbean. And as you know, a result of the slave revolt, and they were, you know, the ancestors blew the winds, and they ended up on this uninhabited island, shipwrecked, where they overpowered their overseers and populated this kingdom. And so I'm really proud that I'm going to get to put that into a Harlequin Presents, and I made sure I warned Harlequin, you know this is what you're gonna get, right? You know, be sure this is what you want, because this is what I'm writing. And they were all for it, so I'm really giddy about it.
So who's the male lead in the Netflix?
If I had to think of a male lead, I'd probably go with, I love me some Idris Elba. Like, I love that man.
Good choice.
I love him. So he's always going to be my choice for a male lead, you know, to be represented on TV.
Yeah. Do you have any dates for that yet, or are you still?
I turn it in next April, so and I'm not sure like what their production time is, but it's probably anywhere from 6 months to a year after that.
Perfect. Yeah. Anne, how about you?
What am I writing? Well, I gave up on the damn book. I think the problem was I've been writing too many historicals in a row, and it just, I haven't really thrown it out. It's just put away, and I might go back to it in a year or two, because it's got a great opening, and I have like, it's 2/3 done, which kills me to throw away good
throw
words.
it away.
Yeah.
Don't.
But I'll probably come back to it. And what I'm writing now is the highly marketable 1938 book, where the hero is a forger. The heroine works at a museum. It's very it's a little Indiana Jones-ish, and I love it. I love it. As a matter of fact, I'm just getting to the love scene. I'm going to be writing it longhand. Because it's all built up, and it's just really key. I also have a romantic suspense in the can, just sitting on my computer, which I need to revise, and I tend to write, my writing style is fairly, somebody called it spare, which I loved, because you never think of romance writers as spare writers. But I need to go back and sort of fill that one out. So I've got basically 1 3/4 and then half a book, 2/3 of a book somewhere else. So I have to decide which I'm going to put out first. And I think I'll probably put out the 1938 book because I love it so much. And I don't have, it's one of those things that could either do tremendously well or just tank completely. But I love it so much. And I discovered I wish I could write to the market. I wish I could write serious books and books about fantasy. Fantasies are big. Fantasy series make people lots and lots of money, and I'd really love lots and lots of money, but I can't write the stuff that is not in my heart. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would read that book. That sounds like a hit to me. Catherine?
So my work in progress it's not just a love story. It's a multi kind of faceted thing, but it's going to be set here in Vermont, and it's a political rom-com. Almost, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Yes.
But it's a heterosexual book about a young woman from Vermont who is moving up in the political ranks, and what love means to a career like that in terms of relationship maintaining and family and whatnot. I was really hoping to get it out for the election next year, because there's a lot of different topics that I thought would be fun to explore in front of a election, but it's probably going to take me a little bit. I'm a kind of a slow writer. There's a lot of research required, but it's really fun, and I love that it's going to be a Vermont politician.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask our panelists?
I want to ask Highland Lodge if he's from Greensboro.
No, but I've been to the Highland.
Oh, yes, that's what I
This is
figured.
actually one of their work shirts. I like their work shirts better than the shirts that they actually had available for sale. I begged them to buy one of their work shirts.
Oh,
They
okay.
said, okay, as long as you don't wear it here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I live in Greensboro, so that's why I wondered.
I'll ask you a question, I guess. So, I imagine somebody must write asexual romance, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just none of you.
But there are, trying to think of some off the top of my head. I can't think of any off the top of my head because I don't read a lot of romances that don't have sex. It's just not personally my cup of tea. I want to see all the sex on a page, and so I can't really tell you, I can't really name any, but you can go like on Amazon and type in asexual romance and you'll find a bunch.
Oh, I should mention my characters who are about to have sex are having it on the Orient Express.
Yes.
See, it's fun to be a writer.
You can make anything up.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wondered if you could talk about publishing your first book and how challenging that was, and LaQuette, if that would be different now, if people are publishing it now, how things have changed.
Oh, absolutely. My first book, I knew absolutely nothing about publishing, and I just put a book up on Amazon. And I think maybe 5 people read it, and most of them were related to me. And it was just, it wasn't that the story wasn't good, I just didn't know enough about publishing to actually be publishing. And what it did do, however, was put me in connection with other authors who knew way more than I did, who helped me sort of up my game. And then shortly after that, I was picked up by a small press where I picked up some more skills and learned some more things, and went to a more medium-sized press after that, until eventually I was, my first traditional book, I want to say, was this book, Jackson. And yeah, so my traditional books have only been over the last, since I want to say 2020 is when I've been publishing traditionally, but it definitely, my writing hasn't changed in much of like what I put in my writing and what I like to see in my books. But my craft has gotten stronger, and my knowledge of the business is definitely more extensive than it was then. So don't be like LaQuette. Don't just put books up, you know, when you know nothing about the publishing industry. Actually learn some stuff first. That's always my advice to new writers. But better than anything else, just have the content. Like, even if you're not well versed in the industry, have the content, and then learn about the business, and then pair those things together. Because it's nothing if you don't have the content.
Well, there's masses of stuff online that can help you. Since I sold in 1974, well, sold in 73, and my first book came out in 74, I was traditional all the way and went through publishers like they were water because they didn't buy another book. That's the whole dangerous point. But but I went through masses of publishers. And when I started writing indie books, it was like having to learn all over again the same things. We have to learn about PR, we have to learn about distribution, you have to take on this whole business aspect, which is a real drag, but some people really thrive that way. They've got a business-like mind and they love the control. There's a steep learning curve, and there's a lot of information to be had.
I was thinking that if I was starting out, I would find an influencer, a book talk influencer, because that seems to be what's really driving books now.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So like, after you guys have a setback, like after you shelve a book or after you turn down Harlequin, what do you do to like get back into stuff? Like, do you take a break or you just like, get reading?
Turning down Harlequin wasn't a breaking point for me. I mean, I turned them down for what I thought was really significant reasons at that time. I didn't really know enough about where the company was trying to go or what they were trying to do. Fortunately, the editor didn't take my no at face value, and he kept working at me until I eventually and presented a better case for why I should publish with Harlequin. But for me, I think the biggest setback that I've had was COVID. By going through the pandemic was such an emotional hit for me personally. And even though, everyone said, oh, the pandemic's over, let's go back to, normal life, I wasn't the same person. It was really hard for me to get back into life after being trapped in my home for 3 years and with small children and a husband. Right? I never realized how much I needed my kids to be in school 6 hours a day. I never realized how much I needed my husband to go outside to work. And it was really hard to get my head space together to be able to write happiness when I didn't necessarily feel happy. So what that took was me reading a lot of romances that weren't mine and stop worrying about the writing and just enjoying the craft for what it is. It also took me going out and finding my own joy, which turned out to be going into a PhD program. I'm weird that way. But I needed to find things that made LaQuette happy. And when I was able to sort of start living that truth again, then I was able to sit down and write without a problem.
Catherine?
You definitely need to have very thick skin in this business. There's so much competition in terms of how many books, I think, what is it? There was some statistic like 3.2 million books went through the cash register, 3.2 million different titles. And of that, to be in the 1% of book sales, you only have to sell more than 500 books. So it's a terribly competitive business to write. And so that can be very demoralizing and kind of set you back, like, why am I bothering kind of thing. But the joy has to be in the writing and the putting it out there and the fun of puzzling a story together. And like LaQuette said, just keep producing, and that really makes a big difference. So you just got to keep writing. And I got to tell you, and I think Anne and I had talked about this a little bit earlier, putting the publicity and the promotion of putting a book out is exhausting, and it's a job that never can end. Like there's always something else you can do, and so that takes away from your ability to sit down and write too. So I don't know if that's not very hopeful, but it is really, really fun. So
You just know your lane. Like,
Yeah.
I am a much better traditional author than I am an indie author because I hate the business side of it. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So, know your lane.
As for me, I am and I can only speak for myself, I am a born writer. I was writing stories when I was 5 years old. I was writing stories, love stories about the Beatles and about Troy Donahue. I have to write. If I am not writing, if I'm not involved, immersed in story, then my life feels empty. So that when something bad happens, like we get rejection or something, the best thing for me to do is to keep working on whatever new I'm working on. Because when you're submitting something, most people have something new they're already working on. And for me, the only way to heal wounds or tough times is to write.
So I think we're just about out of time. I really want to thank our three panelists for